Just for the record, what is your definition?
Having read all the articles recently, I'm a bit loath to attempt it, but I think that idea of it being a, I've been thinking recently about that idea of the communist idea of social realism, which I hate to sort of associate with my own writing. But I remember Russian poet. You can edit this out later if you like. Akhmatova, Anna Akhmatova, whose poetry I really like. She was thrown out of the Writers' Union because the stuff was regarded as too personal, which I always found, really tragic and brutal and all the rest of it, and I still do. But I've been thinking about that idea of social realism with regard to folk music, and I think that sort of class thing does exist there. I mean, I don't think Streets of Forbes was essentially just a song about Ben Hall. It's a song about the oppression of small farmers, Irish essentially small farmers in New South Wales at that period. And the reason it's successful is not because it caught the tragedy of one man's death, but because it catches the sort of attitude towards authority and oppression of a class that was sort of encapsulated in that, the death of Ben Hall and his defiance of that. So, that's the sort of thing that I think is essential to it, whatever else it might be. I think that essential to a folk song is that idea, or that linking, that tapping into a sort of a class-based thing. It's not the music of the big house as they used to talk about it. Somebody used this before about the piano was in the big house, and down in the shearing sheds you had the concertina and so forth. It's not the music of the big house. It's the music of the shearing sheds. When you start playing it for the big house, you get the sort of the Irish drawing room stuff of Moore and that sort of prostitution of the real people's feelings. So I won't go much further trying to define a folk song, but I think that's essential to it. I mean, that's really what I found difficult initially, to move away from that personal thing. In fact, when I write poetry now, it's still the same as it always was. The two things are totally separate. In fact, Dennis Kevin's, whose work I really, really like, and whose opinions are always rather forthright, told me once that he didn't like my poetry at all, likes my songs but not the poetry, and I can see why. There's a totally different approach to the two things. There isn't in his. I mean, his songs and his poetry are both drawing on the same sources, I think, but that's not the way that I've developed.
I'd like to separate lyrics and music from a moment, and who are your lyrical influences and who are your musical influences when you're writing?
Well, certainly, as far as words are concerned, I think the two people who probably made it possible for me to write songs were Duke Tritton and Woody Guthrie, although, as I've often said, I don't like the sort of American influence in folk songs, but certainly I think the American folk tradition is a great tradition. And when I came across his stuff, I came across Alan Lomax's two-record album of his, this must have been, 15 years ago or so, and I remember the interview and the talk and the songs there and the potential that I could see in what he was doing that made me realise just what a field it would be to work in, and I wasn't working it then, and then of course Tritton's Sandy Hollow line was the clincher, I suppose. That's which I regard as one of the greatest songs in Australian folk music.
So it was hearing that song that made you realise that you could write songs.
I think Tritton's song really brought it brought everything into an Australian focus. I think that's what it was with Tritton. I know that song had a tremendous impact on me when I first heard that, and it was the old Dunlavin Green thing that John Dengate put to it, and in the old days, not the Great Northern Lion version, which I think spoils the whole thing. But that version, I could see there that the sort of statements you could make through folk music, and I see that as an important function of it.
What about musical influences?
I did an interview once where somebody asked me who were my influences, and I said I had none. And I've since thought about that and realised how wrong that was, and I can answer your question on the lyrics now much better, but now I've never thought about the musical influence.
Because you write really unusual melodies. Some very beautiful melodies.
I don't really know. I know that there's I can't think of anybody who has influenced my writing except for an obscure French classical composer whose name I can't think of, who used very strange rhythms which have always appealed to me, and which I worked on when I was learning the flute with Jim Denley, and I've often thought that has plagued some of my songs since. I can't think who the man is, and I don't think he's a major influence. It's just that rhythmic thing that he did, which was a sort of, I think it comes out in Snow River Men, and also in Dial Off a Store, that rhythm thing there. But I mean, apart from that, I mean that's only marginal really. The melodic line is, I'm always conscious of a Celtic influence. I don't know, I can't think of any writer, but I'm always conscious of a Celtic influence, and also quite often I'll change a tune to keep that sort of connection. There's a sort of modal thing, I think, sometimes. I don't know all that much about technicalities of music, but I think there's that which probably does come through the Celtic influence.
Yeah. What motivates you to write songs?
Well, I would have said some time ago that it's a sort of extension. Well, Mitchell actually described my writing as an extension of my political activities, and I would have said that some time ago, but I don't think I'd say that any longer. I think that the idea of producing, of creating something that's, I think there's a value in creating the attractive thing itself. Certainly the political thing is still there, the idea of expressing an idea of class, and I don't mean a narrow political thing. I mean Victor Jara's stuff. One of the things I learned from the Chileans was the idea of the idea of straight protest is rather narrow. The whole class-based thing is there are values to be asserted in that. There's obvious things like love and loyalty and things like that, which don't naturally transpose to or translate into political ideologies, perhaps, but they're there in the sort of lifestyle of those sorts of people. The competition thing isn't.
Come together very much in that song. Come my companions, don't they?
Yes.
Pulling people together for a political.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. There's, like the children and the rest of it too. The idea of all the values that exist in those in ordinary people's lives. Yeah. It's there in the Mount Kembla thing too. I think that idea of loyalty, and that's one of the things that really struck me about that was the way that they came together in that. There's a great story in that about this. The way they cope with that tragedy. There was a particular woman whose name I've forgotten now, whom they all referred to, and when they talk about their own loss, someone lost 4 members of their family, and they'd all say things like, yes, but it's still not as bad as poor Mrs. So-and-so. And what happened to her was that her husband's head was blown off, and knowing that she was coming to identify the body, they put the head back on. and had him lying on a stretcher there. And the story goes that she took the head in her hands and went to kiss it, and the head came up, and she walked with the head, and she said, "Yes, that's Tom." Then the story was, they were still telling the story when Roger Piggin went there, 10, 15 years ago, and was still collecting. And she walked with the head in her hands, and she said, "Yes, that's my Tom," and then collapsed, and they took her back, and they told that story. And they were all, it was a binding thing between them, you know. And the compassion for her, which was, you know, one of those values which are, you know, it's not political, but it's a real important, I mean, it's a thing that expresses itself politically as it would in their trade union activities later, and the women's auxiliaries and things like this, so they all work together. But there's a real value in which their compassion expressed itself, you know, for her, and the way in which they were able to cope better with their own tragedy by sort of you know, responding to hers. I see that as part of the lifestyle, which the politics of is essential too. But all of these things go to build the other. So it's a whole mass, you know, of a sort of lifestyle, of values, of you know, if you look at the idea of competition, say, as being a sort of driving force in our society, it's less of a driving force in that sort of environment. You know, there's more value in cooperation, and that's this, you know, that's a political fact, but it's also a valuable social and personal fact, you know, to me. And I think that's what Hara has in his writing. There's songs like Luchin, the song about the boy who lives with the horse. The horse keeps him warm, you know. There's no direct political statement there, but there's a statement about poverty and compassion and things like that are, you know, part of it.